We hold our televised discussions twice monthly to demonstrate the value of civil, productive, open-minded political dialogue. Today's topic is welfare reform. Federal welfare programs first started in 1935 during the Great Depression. With widespread poverty, starvation, and unemployment, a series of programs were created to help Americans place food on the table and to help those unable to support themselves and their family. Today, the means-tested welfare system consists of 79 government programs that offer cash, food, social services, education, training, and housing for low-income Americans. As welfare programs are funded through local, state, and federal taxes in the amount of $1 trillion annually, $1 trillion annually, they are often the topic of political debate. Today's panel, beginning on my left, is Joe Gaines, member of the faculty of the University of Akron. On his left is Dr. Ronald Chamberlin, retired senior research chemist. On his left is Bryan Laubaugh, president of R&B Financial Services. And on his left is Patty Haskins, member of the Wadsworth City Council. Joe, in addition to satisfying basic needs of our Americans who are unable to care for themselves, our welfare state is accused of providing financial incentives that promote idleness, destroy families, and is responsible for the creation of a large American underclass. Some think it's time for a national debate on welfare reform. What do you think?
Well, first off, I want to tell you I think this is a great topic. This is one of the most interesting topics that I've been present here on the show to discuss. It's one of the topics that everybody has an opinion of, good or bad. But my view is rather odd. It's mixed. In that I come from a background where my father, who was not educated at all, he was forced out of third grade. He wasn't even allowed to go back to the third grade by his parents because they wanted him to get a job. At 9 years old, he couldn't read or he couldn't read or write at all in his life. So the opportunities weren't there for him, but he worked. The opportunity was there for him to get a job, and he got a job working in a steel mill. Now, here's a man that can't read, can't write, has very little opportunity in life, but he's making pretty good money working in a steel mill, buying a new car every 2 years, building his own home, raising a family, putting me through college, did everything that anybody would want to do. Wow. Because the opportunity was there at the mill, at the factory.
What a guy.
Well, the thing is, are those opportunities still there? He didn't go on welfare, but his brothers did. Many of them did. I have a lot of cousins on welfare. I have a lot of relatives on welfare.
Where in the United States was this? What city?
Appalachia, West Virginia. He moved to Steubenville, where he was able to get a job working in a steel mill in Weirton Steel, and that changed everything.
Yeah.
Even his brother, who went with him, changed because he, my uncle and my dad both only had one child. That had a lot to do with it. A lot of my uncles had like as many as 11, 12 kids, and supporting that, and then not having good jobs. My background is that I look at that and I go, well, if you want to, you can make it, but you have to want to. I'm not sure that's fair to those people, though, because going on welfare can be any reason: illness, lack of jobs, lack of education.
Yeah. Do you think your father was just born with the motivation to succeed?
I don't know. That's a good point.
What were his parents like?
Oh, no, they were terrible.
Oh.
I don't mean to be mean or rude or anything. My father was physically abused. He came from a family of 12. They were farmers. At 9 years old, he's working on the road, carrying water. And at 11, at 11, his brother was forced out of the house, who was 11 years old, and lived on his own. And that's how they were.
He wasn't a water boy on the construction of Route 30, was he?
No.
My father-in-law was. That's the reason I asked.
Oh, let's not be related. Well, I have some information though on welfare. The federal government funds 126 separate programs targeted towards towards low-income people. 72 programs will provide either cash or kind in benefits to individuals. No individual nor family gets benefits from all 72 programs. Now, I looked at New York, and the reason I looked at New York was because I thought that would be a good state to get the information on, because it has a lot of different groups of people, rich, poor, living in cities, living in the country. New York, state of New York, a family receiving temporary assistance for needy families would have a package of benefits worth $38,000, the seventh highest in the nation. Now remember that welfare benefits are not taxed while wages are. So someone in New York would have to earn more than $21 per hour to be better off than they would be on welfare.
How big is that family that got 38? Is that a family of 4?
No. Oh, yeah, a mother, father, and 2 kids.
Okay.
Yes. The same as the entry-level salary for a teacher in New York. Having a job means added costs for child care, transportation, and clothing. And that brings us to the idea that getting a job is costly. And they're making more money on welfare than they would be getting, having a job. So in many cases, they look at it as like, well, this is better not to have the job. I'm having more money coming in from welfare than if I had the job.
And even if they got a minimum wage job, that gets deducted from their welfare payments.
Right.
Yeah.
There's no evidence that people on welfare are lazy. Indeed, surveys consistently show that there's a desire for work. However, they are not. If you pay them more not to work than they can be by working, they will choose not to work. One of the most important steps towards avoiding and getting out of poverty is a job. Only 2.6% of full-time workers are poor versus 23.9% of adults who don't work. Even minimal wage jobs can be a springboard out of poverty. Some pros to welfare. It provides assistance where it is needed most. Most people served by welfare are children. 20% of American children live in a household that are at poverty level. Welfare programs can help to reduce crime, which I kind of argued with, but I didn't find any information against that.
So what you're saying, it sounds like it's pretty easy to take advantage or abuse the system.
Well, yeah, but should the system change is a question.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it should or not. I personally believe that we need it, and it should stay basically the same. It needs tweaked.
Yeah.
It needs to be changed to the point that it doesn't hurt you or me.
Well, we're going to get into that in a little bit. Ron, where's your thinking on this?
Well, thanks, Joe, for looking at those things up. I did some studying. I couldn't find anything all that contemporary. Yeah, I think this is well, first of all, most of our laws, I think, turn out to have unintended consequences, and I think we do need to, once in a while, go back and look at them and very thoroughly see what's going on here and how can we improve this and fix it, and this is one of them. My personal experience with folks on welfare goes back now about 25 years when I lived in Danbury, Connecticut, and I was involved with the homeless population. At that time, all the business of the welfare mom just wasn't true. It wasn't true there, and my reading and statistic at that point said it wasn't all that true in the rest of the country, at least in most of the time. I knew folks who had been living on their friends' couches and got into a stable program and were able to get jobs and send their kids to school, to one school a year instead of several, and that kind of thing. So that was very helpful. I'm sure that it's true that folks not so much take advantage of it, but Joe, you mentioned something about is the opportunity there, and I think our economics have changed. I don't think the opportunities are possibly there in a lot of cases.
You're talking about employment opportunities?
I'm talking about employment opportunities now.
Yeah.
And so there is that. It's an expensive thing, welfare. I think we have to be careful that it has seemed to me in many cases that arguments against the welfare system are engaged at saving money rather than compassionate care for the folks who are on welfare. And I think we have to be very careful about that.
Yeah.
So,
Bryan, you've got a very thoughtful look on your face.
Well, I think we've created a monster that the federal government just can't solve. And part of the solution is we need to do block grants to local communities so that the money can be, they can be held accountable. And there is no accountability, it seems, in the current welfare state. I'm glad Joe brought those numbers up. When you can actually make more money on welfare than having a job, who would work? I mean, these are smart people. They're obviously not dumb, poor people. They're smart, poor people, because when they can pull down 38 grand a year or $21 an hour sitting around and doing what they're doing, then they're incentivized to not work. Joe's recollections of his father going off to work. My dad went into the service. He was never too proud to work. Mm-hmm. And I think there is a little bit of a strain in this class of people that the government has created, that they're too proud at times to work. A minimum wage job is an entry-level position to get the skills that you need to show up to work on time, to not put in, not work 3 days and quit, not work 5 days and get sick. So there's a lot of skills that people don't learn when they're unemployed, and and we've created it's generational now. We have families that have never worked before, so the stigma. And I agree, we have to be compassionate, but I think we need to be accountable, and the best way is, for me, my opinion is that local faith-based organizations and charitable organizations locally are much better equipped to make those determinations and to help people out of poverty.
You like the idea of creating a firestorm, don't you?
Well, I'm saying we need to give people a hand out of that. There needs to be a pathway out of. Now, obviously, there are groups of sickness and old age and all that kind of stuff. Nobody wants to starve the kids, but when you have a family of 4 that basically are incentivized not to work, where does that lead you?
I was referring to the experience during the second Bush administration, where they used faith-based organizations, and it was very, very successful.
Yeah.
But it sure did fly in the face of the separation of church and state business.
Well, and Bill Clinton had a major run at welfare reform, if you remember. I mean, a lot of the problems
in '96.
That was supposed to be solved, and it dies by the wayside. And I understand the compassionate piece of this, but I'm wondering, how compassionate is it for a person to continue on in a behavior that is never ever going to be corrected? I mean, I think most people have been, let's just say, a fair amount of people are wired to work. Mm-hmm. There's a lot that goes in. It's not just money. It's the skills that you learn, the self-esteem. I'm sure Joe's dad, I know my dad was a very proud individual. There would be no way that he was going to go out and take any sort of handout from anybody. He was going to provide, and to go from being in the military to delivering candy to being a janitor and then working at the post office, that was never beneath him. He never said, you know what, I'm not going to do that job, deliver candy. That's beneath me. I'm going to wait here, collect welfare until the big job comes along, or until I'm a rap star. I mean,
what kind of jobs are there out there now for these people?
Currently, we're in one of the strongest job-creating economies that we've had in a long time.
I don't know about that.
Oh, no, it's.
I've
mean,
read just the opposite.
no,
too.
there's
The
just the
unemployment
last
rate's like 3.2 or
yeah,
something.
just the
Yeah.
last quarter it created 222,000 jobs. They're
All kinds.
All kinds of jobs.
Yeah.
You take your own little survey. You go around Wadsworth and look at all the help wanted signs. Now they might not be the $25 an hour job as a
right.
computer coder, but that person doesn't have the skill to do that.
No.
Let's get them into a job where they can, let's say it's a $15 an hour job or a $10 an hour job. Let's just get them, let's break the cycle of poverty by getting them to work, getting the skills that they need, and letting the economy move them along.
Yeah.
Nobody started out as the CEO of a company. Nobody, your dad didn't start out
No,
as
but my father laughed when he read my contract to Wadsworth High School, because he said, "This is how much you're making a year?" I said, "Yeah." He said, I make 3 times that as a laborer working in a steel mill.
You're right. Those kind of jobs for people who have no skills aren't there anymore.
That's what I mean.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But there are
There's a
tons of
facility.
jobs for people
Amazon's
that have.
putting a facility in the old Rolling Acre site.
Right.
And that's going to bring, I don't know how many thousands of jobs, but on the other end of it, they're like, oh, wait a second, they actually want me to show up to work, and I might have to work the holidays. And, those people.
You're assuming that, though.
Yeah, those people are assuming that. But a lot of those people working on the ground floor at Amazon are being given Amazon stock. There's more Amazon millionaires that work in warehouses, that work in fulfillment centers than there has ever been, because they took part of their salary, they bought stock, Amazon stock. I mean, that's sort of the dream, the capitalist dream. So, sorry.
Patty, I got a question for you. Bryan talked about block grants and making local officials accountable for the expenditures. Do you think that voters actually hold local and state officials accountable to the same level that they would federal officials?
Yes.
You do?
Yeah. Now, one concern, though, when you mentioned the block grants, the Atlantic published an article in, I think it was 2017, about a program which included the block grants in Maine and what they had done in that state to deal with poverty. And one of their ideas, and this was also in the 1996 bill that Clinton had passed, was that there was a work requirement that you would have to work 20 hours a week, or 24 hours a week you would have to volunteer. What this does not take into consideration are those, though, that cannot work, or for whatever reason. These are the people that are in deep poverty, whether this be single parents, whether this be infants, whether this be addicts, whether it be victims of domestic abuse, whether it be people that are on parole from prison or recently incarcerated, or those that have health disabilities that do not enable them to work, that they're not going to be out there able to perform that job. We have made, I think we have a bias between the deserving poor and the non-deserving poor. There are many that are not poor because of any action they have taken or by anything that they have done wrong, but they simply are unable to work. That in order to have a job, there are certain requirements that people have to have. They have to have transportation. They have to have affordable child care. They have to have the education and the training, and that may not be available to them either because of where they live, but they might be in a rural area where there is no transportation. For example, in Wadsworth, there is no public transportation that enables you to get to a job easily. And these are some of the problems, that they run into. Recently, in part of the budget, Trump had cut aid for seniors, for low-income, children, single parents, the rural poor, disabled. And what we need to be able to find is a situation where those that are in this position will be able to get a job and to make it an affordable job. I remember last March, in one of the first sessions of Congress, there was an interview, the Wall Street was brought in, and various executives from various banks, whether it be Wells Fargo or whatever, were brought in, and they were discussing some of the mortgages and lending practices that were encompassed by this bank. And at one point, Katie Porter, who was a congressman from California, was questioning the CEO of JP Morgan Chase. And she went through a very detailed account of a teller in that bank. So this is a person that is working 40 hours a week in a respectable job. She then went through the costs that that particular employee would have. And I watched the whole thing. They were very reasonable costs for necessities. Renting a place to live, food, clothing, and everything she minimalized. And she ended up finding that each month that person would end up with being $567 in the hole. That working that 40-hour-a-week job at that bank was not going to enable that person to be self-sufficient and have what many would consider the American way of life and be able to support themselves. And that there seems to be some kind of problem when you cannot at least take your, people that are willing to work and enable them to have that normalcy that most have. President Trump just yesterday touted the fact that we have spent $2.5 trillion on our military since he has been in office. We have spent $2.5 trillion on our military.
Now, that's about the same as we're spending on welfare.
But he's been making cuts in the welfare.
No,
And
excuse
we
me.
have
Can the president make cuts? Spending is
Well, that's the budget that comes through, and that comes through
I know.
Congress, but that has to be both parties agreeing to what that budget is. And that is what he has recommended. And he is very proud of the fact he is saying, I am the one that spent $2.5 trillion. And so he's taking that as credit. So I'm just giving him credit for what he says. I think there's so many things in this country as far as what we have done to decrease the value of the worker, that we are creating, yes, while we have fewer, we have increase or decrease in our unemployment rate, the value of those jobs has decreased. I mean, the downfall of unions in this country, if you've ever watched the movie Roger and Me by Michael Moore in 1989, excellent movie, but he went through his hometown of Flint, Michigan, and looked at the impact that the loss of good union jobs can cause to a community and to an area, and the increase of the poor.
I'll bet you that Michael Moore didn't blame the unions for any of that. The loss of jobs.
Didn't he?
Did he? I didn't see the
some point.
movie.
No,
I read the
I don't
book.
think so, but no, but when you look at the fact that union jobs are not prevalent now, and that people are working for less and less, which is the reason they're required to work not one job but two
Right.
jobs in order to make a decent living, which then means that that family unit, which so many tend to think is the most important thing in this country, is being hurt. Well, it would hurt if that family member is away from the family for 16 hours a day and is paying for extra child care. I'm not sure that's doing much to help the family. So I think there are many things that we can do. Yes, I disagree. There's too much fraud that goes on in welfare, and there are those that take advantage of it. But to start putting some of these requirements in, instead of dealing with that sense of deep poverty and those that are living on the streets because they cannot afford or to have a job, that's something that we need to address.
Okay, in the 1 minute we've got left, I'd like you to chime in on the question of self-sufficiency. Should that be a key goal in any welfare program, to aim people toward self-sufficiency?
Yes, but unfortunately, there are those that are never going to be able to be self-sufficient.
Okay, I wish we had more time.
Yeah.
Let me ask you about that. Do you think that, right now we've got several states that are really agitating toward cutting people off that are able-bodied, can work, don't have dependents, so forth.
Right.
But aren't there some people that just psychologically, I mean, If you've never known anyone who had a job, how emotionally equipped are you to work?
Well, and that's, some people are not physically able
Or
have a job.
emotionally?
Emotionally able. And then one of the other problems
That would be a fun topic.
I read a
to
case where
get
a
into.
woman who technically probably was unable to hold a job, but she couldn't afford to go to the doctor to get the designation that she was unable to hold
Yeah.
a job in order to collect welfare, and she was living on the street.
Well, I think that we've made the case that it's time for welfare reform.
I would agree with that.
Thank you very much, folks.